Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to use Stampin' Up's Jar of Horns, and I've got a couple of the die cut pieces of cardstock using Lawn Fawn's Bayou backdrop dies and they actually stuck in the paper, so that's why they're still in, after I've die cut them, they're still stuck there. So I've cut them out twice, and I'm going to use some peeled paint and some forest moss distress ink just to give them that sort of really dingy looking bayou look about them. The other piece that I've got is also a stitched rectangle, which you'll see in a bit, for the background, and we're also going to do some masking on this card. But I wanted to get this, it's got a very thin frame, I wanted to get this inked in hindsight, and I had a really good tip from Tim Holtz on one of his videos, his latest live that he did, is that if you create all your backgrounds, you can then use those to die cut with. So why I didn't think to do that in the first place is beyond me, but anyway. So and that would have been much easier because there's a lot of really fine bits to this Bayou backdrop, which is another reason why I've left it in the die cut, so that it doesn't it's a bit easier to actually ink. So I'm just going around sporadically, not doing any, it doesn't have to be very sort of clean inking. I'm just getting the ink on there, and kind of the more messed up it looks, the better it looks. So I'm going in now with the forest moss. That is what it's called, isn't it? I'm trying to read the screen. Forest moss, and this just gives it a darker, like I say, more dingy kind of look to the Bayou backdrop. This is a cool die, actually. I've had it for quite a long time, and it's one I go back to for many different things. So here you'll see I'm just going to try and pop this out. Now I realized afterwards that I didn't put the correct plates on my machine, which is why it hasn't die cut completely on the sides. So I'll have to go back in a bit and just use a craft knife and just gently cut through those, and I'll show you what I do for that when I get to it. This is where I kind of realized that they're kind of stuck in there, so another reason why it didn't pop out. So just use the correct layers and the correct sandwich when you go to die cut your dies through your machine, because more intricate dies sometimes need an extra shim, which can be a piece of cardstock. I actually, with the Sizzix, I actually have the Big Shot, sorry, I have a plate that is it's meant for intricate dies, so I should have just used that, and I didn't, so it's my fault. So but it's easy to fix. So this is a stitched rectangle. I think the cardstock is just normal cardstock, so it's just regular box standard cardstock. The only other cardstock I think it might have been, because I did this a while ago, might have been some Bristol Smooth, but it doesn't, I'm not sure that it is, but I've used box standard cardstock before and it's worked perfectly fine. So what I'm taking is some of the images from the Jar of Horns stamp set from Stampin' Up, and I'm just adding them where I want them. I had an idea beforehand, so I've made the masks and everything for them. So the green mask is actually one I already had from a series of Halloween cards and projects that I made in 2016. So if you want to check them out, there's a whole playlist on that. And so I already had those, so I just kept them with the stamp set. So they're just out of post-it notes, which is what I'm doing with the leaves and the stalk as well, because I actually realized I needed that. I needed to mask that as well. So I have those two, and then the two jars that I've stamped at the top, they're out of some Stick It masking paper. No, Sticks 2 masking paper. And I've used this before in my videos, and it's not super sticky, so it doesn't, which is the idea, but I find sometimes it's not quite sticky enough for me, so I don't know whether it's just really old. I've had it for many years, so it might just be nearly, just that sort of too old now that it won't stick quite as well as it should. But it's good, it's nice, and you can reuse them if you choose to. So now that I've masked up my pumpkin, I'm going to stamp the mummy jar over the top, and now he will appear as if he's behind the pumpkin. So that's the thing with masking, stamp the thing you want in the front first, mask it, then stamp the next thing you want behind that, mask it, and then stamp the next thing. And as you stamp them, they'll sort of layer up, if you like, and one will be behind the next one. So with this jar, I decided I wanted it on its side, so I just turned it. Simple. It's not rocket science or anything. I just kind of went, oh, actually, because it's in a bayou, it's probably going to be scattered. They're not all going to be bolt upright or anything like that. They're going to be all over the place, these jars, in the middle of this bayou. And then one of the accompanying stamps in the same stamp set is these eyeballs that you can put in the jar. And so I just angled them because I figured the jar's lying on its side, so of course whatever's in the jar is going to be tilted. It's not going to be level. So if you think in terms of that, then hopefully that helps when you're trying to put things like this together. So now that I've masked everything, I can't say that word, I'm now going to ink blend and create a background. So I'm doing a very simple background. I just want this sort of, they're in this sort of dingy water at the bottom. I could have added a bit of green to this as well, but I'm using Stormy Sky for this because it's kind of a darker blue for the watery bit. And then I'm using Dusty Concord for the upper portion, which will be more the sky tone in the background. And just blending them until they blend together. And these are the distressings as opposed to the oxides. Very easy to blend together as well. The main thing when it comes to blending with the blending tool that I'm using is to angle it slightly, so it's not going, you angle it you put it at a slight angle so it's sort of lifted before it gets to the paper, and it blends much easier on the paper. And also it does depend on what cardstock you use, but I experiment with whatever I've got. If I've got watercolor cardstock, I use that and I just see what happens. That's the best way to experiment with it. So what I did is I also took some black soot and just did the edges of that. I thought that just made the sky a little more spooky-ish looking. So, and I know I'm making Halloween cards and it's now November, but that's kind of what I said that I wanted to do, was to keep inspiring you guys with things like fall or Halloween. I don't have a lot of fall stuff, so Halloween is kind of my thing, so that's what you'll see more of. But I figured, why not do that till the end of the year? Then you guys have got more inspiration for next year, if not this year. Well, obviously not this year because it's gone now, but for next year. So what I chose to do is I am just where the opposite bayou, the other panel, I needed to cut those pieces out, and they cut fairly easily because they were mostly cut. It's just they didn't quite go all the way through. So I'm just cutting that through onto the and it doesn't really even go through onto the other piece of cardstock, just so there's something. I didn't want to cut directly on my glass mat. I just thought that I have this thing I don't want to cut on my glass mat, even though it's probably fine, but I don't want to do it. And then I took a distress sprayer. If you haven't got one of these, seriously get yourself one. They are awesome. And I've had it for many years. It's now yellow, just because I've had it so long. And I just spritzed it with some water, but because of where I've taken that water off with the paper towel, it's made more of a white spot. So I didn't want those white spots sort of so in your face kind of thing, because it's supposed to be all this dingy nighttime scene. So I went over, without re-inking my blender tools, I went over everything with those same colors, and it just tones it down, but it just gives it another look. I could have spritzed it and then just heat set it, and that would have given it a whole other distress look. That's the fun thing about distress inks. There's so much you can do, even if you've got maybe half a dozen colors. I know there's like 60 of the colors and there's more coming out, but even if you've got half a dozen of them, honestly, you can do so much with them. My tip would be to get and you can download these from Google, is just a color wheel, just so that you know which colors will work next to each other, because sometimes you can just create mud out of color combinations, and if mud's your thing, great, but if it's not, and mine is not, then just know a color wheel will just give you an idea of what kind of colors work next to each other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now color these images in. So I thought some really easy watercoloring. So I've got Rusty Hinge, Antique Linen. I'll obviously show you all the colors as I go, but I'll try and remember to say what they are as well. And I'm just putting them onto my media mat. There's some weathered wood. And this is the Tim Holtz Glass Media Matte, which I now use all the time, so apologies for the glare. At time I'm still working on that. And it comes with a little mat that goes to the right hand side. So if you're doing ink blending techniques, then that's what it works differently. Tim explains everything about it, but it works brilliantly, and I'll try and do some videos on that as well in the future. And so I'm adding some water, and I'm taking a good old paintbrush. I've gone back to using a paintbrush as opposed to that aqua marker pen thing that I can never get the name right. I have more control with a paintbrush and water. I don't know why, but I just do. So this is very simple watercoloring. There is nothing fancy about this. I'm not necessarily going back and adding layers of color, which you can do, but just bear in mind that what you need to do is make sure each layer is dry before you go back and add more moisture to it. Otherwise it doesn't do anything. It just wants to blend together. And another thing, and you'll see this a couple times, one with the leaf and one with the pumpkin, is that when I go in to do my mummy, because those colors of the orange and the green are still wet, it actually picks it up. So I landed with a bit of green in my mummy and a bit of orange. The orange you'll see a bit more clearly in a second. You'll see it sort of suddenly, you'll see this blob of orange that starts to, there you go, that it starts to creep out. And that's because the orange paint and the green paint are not dry yet. So if you want to do it really quickly, which is obviously what I was trying to do here, you can do that. Just be careful about where you put your, how close you get your brush to those other colors. It's not a big deal, and it's fine, and it works out fine in the end. And if you need to, clean your brush off so it's just water on it, and a fairly dry brush, and then just pick up that color. The brush will actually suck that excess moisture up if it's a fairly dry brush. So that's quite a handy tip. And then you can always use a paper towel just to absorb some of that excess color that isn't supposed to be where it's decided to go. So hopefully that made some sense. With watercolor, I find it's quite forgiving with things like that. So what I decided to do, I stuck the Bayou on as it's meant to be, the right way up. And now I'm going to stick this one the opposite way, so it looks like these reeds coming from the bottom up. It just gives it a different sort of look. And also now for me, it's almost like a diorama is the wrong word, but you could make this into a bit of a diorama by layering up on some foam, but they're very skinny frames, so I didn't really want to do that. And so I just decided to lay them up as I've done, and it just gives it that sort of depth without there being a lot of depth. And then of course it is still a Halloween card, so I stamped a Halloween sentiment. Again, this is all in the same stamp set from Stampin' Up! From, like I say, I did a series on this in 2016, so it's that many years old. But I like when old product is kind of got like a new lease of life. So when people come up with new ideas for old product, I love that, because sometimes we still have those things. We don't get rid of them as and when, they go out of style or whatever. We pay good money for them, and we need ideas. So that's why I decided to do this little thing this week. So stay tuned for the Christmas version, and obviously if you haven't seen Tuesdays, then go back to that as well. And hopefully this gives you some more inspiration on what to do with these stamps. These are some of my favorite because they're Halloweeny and I love Halloween, and the more gory and weird the better. But also, just another thing, what I should have done before I stuck all this together, and what I do after I've finished the video, is that I actually took a black fine liner, and actually sort of carefully drew in between the reeds, so that it looked like they were actually sitting in the water, rather than it being that they just kind of look like they're floating there. So it gave them some grounding, which I forgot to do before sticking it all together. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some inspiration for another Halloweeny style card, with, especially if you have the Jar of Horns stamp set and die set, or even just the stamp set, because this is masking. And I will see you in the next one, guys. Bye.